Perfect. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. As Adriana said, it will be a bit long because my aim is to make sense of pornography. So I will take you a lot through my personal interpretations of it, and hopefully it will help you have the arguments, because a lot of the time we can feel the dehumanization, we can understand it, but it's really difficult to explain in what precisely that is the case. So it would also take you through my personal journey into this, because I have changed my opinion a lot on the topic. And if some of you are already familiar with the work of Andrea Dworkin, Gail, this might not be so interesting for you. And you will recognize a lot of their arguments, but I won't be able to fight them every time. And I've worked a lot also on the work of Susan Griffin and Robert Jensen. So I will get that out of the way. And my research in pornography, I've been tied to that topic the day that someone really close to me told me, because I used to believe that pornography could be feminist. I used to be one of those people. And that person told me, but Yağmur, how can you believe that? You're an abolitionist. You understand that prostitution is violence against a woman and pornography is prostitution. And that's when it all makes sense. Because if you think of it, the act is not so different. You still have men who pay women to enact certain sexual acts for money. And so the only difference is that the men don't get to have that act on themselves, but on others. But that's.
Oh no. Well, sorry about that. Something went wrong. Oh my god. Sorry about that, everyone. Can you unmute yourself, Yağmur? Wait. Can you talk now?
Yes, I can. I think I cannot unmute myself if you don't. Don't worry.
No, that's good. Sorry about that.
I will close the video panel as well. Okay. So when you think of it, the act is still the same. And this is what also you realize in research on prostitution, what you hear from survivors of prostitution. So one of the most extensive studies done on prostitution by Melissa Farley and others, over 9 countries and with more than 800 women in prostitution, what has appeared is that the women, half of them, had also been used in pornography. So the act is the same. So what happens in pornography, I'll keep on going even since the recording is on. So with the same acts. And in fact, so for example, and then the men who are involved in prostitution also know that the distinction between pornography and prostitution is not really one. So Farley again relates this case of this brothel in Nevada that had women who had been used in pornography before in its brothel, and then he advertised it as porn stars to rent, and inside that brothel men could film themselves during the act of prostitution. So there is this knowledge that the two things are inextricably linked, and that is made most visible by the word pornography itself. And a lot of the presentation today will be about words. And the key argument here is the one made by Andrea Dworkin. That is, if the word hasn't changed, the meaning hasn't changed. This is why throughout her book, Pornography, Men Possessing Women, she keeps repeating that vagina means sheath. And I didn't know that word before, but sheath, it's where you put your sword when you don't use it. And for thousands of years, we've been using that same word, vagina. In the same way, Nawal al-Saadawi, in her book, Woman at Point Zero, The Hidden Face of Eve, she keeps repeating that family comes from the word familus, which is the possession of men. We're still using the same word today. We have got rid of words in the past because we have understood that they were damaging, that they were discriminatory, but those words have stuck till today. And that is the same case with pornography. And pornography is made of porne and graphy and graphos. So the porne is the most despised women in prostitution in ancient Greece, because the Greeks came up with loads of categories for women in prostitution, and the porne were sexual slaves, and they were so low that even boys who were sexual slaves, once they became adults, could abuse those women. So even men who do not even own their own freedom, their own self, could own those women. And graphein is to write, from which graphos, which is depiction. This is why Andrea Dworkin starts her book by saying that pornography is the graphic depiction of vile whores. And this is why now I see those expressions that are coming into use, for example, SEM, that stands for sexually explicit material. But that is not what makes pornography pornography. It's not its explicit nature, it's its porne nature. And in the same way I see pornocriminality, but that is still unclear because the logic of prostitution lies in that graphos. And that is made most clear by the fact that when the word comes back into use, that happens in 19th century France in the form of pornography. And it means the first recorded definition at the time is one of treaty on prostitution. And a treaty is a text that aims to explain something. And in the same way, at the time, in the UK as well, the word was used in both sides of the channel to describe the lives of women in prostitution. So it aims to tell us something. And we will try to see what it aims to tell us. But before that, we have to know what is in pornography. And again, Dworkin. She says that the boys, that's how she ends the book. She says the boys rely on women not knowing what happens in pornography. And she says the boys are wrong. So we need to prove Andrea right. In the first issue of Playboy, which is where Gail Dines traces the beginning of contemporary pornography, there is a warning to female potential readers. So the subtitle of Playboy is entertainment for men. You also have it in boys, so it's always the male sex. But then you have a warning that says that if you're a woman and you accidentally pick that magazine, please put it back where you found it. The Museum of Pompeii has forbidden for years access to the artifacts that were considered pornographic to women and children and men of lower caste. So pornographers rely on women not knowing what's going inside. So a way to go through this is to look at the terms that are researched the most in some of the most popular websites. So how would I call that? The style of pornography that is the most widespread is the one that is called gonzo by the ones in the industry. So a sort of porno verite, that's how they call it in adult video news. And it's a form, it doesn't pretend to have a plot. It doesn't pretend that the sex is part of a larger scenario. It just starts from it, and it doesn't have any pretensions, supposedly so-called artistic or else. And it's immediate and it's a short format, and the presence of the camera is acknowledged, and I will come back to that later. So it's possible to understand what's going on by classifying the terms by incest, pedophilia, racism, and then looking at the acts. So in incest and pedophilia, first of all, we have the figure of the mother. MILF, mother I'd like to fuck. Stepmom, mom, mother, mature. Those are some of the most preferred terms across the world and throughout time. Then we also have the daughters that can be used. So there is this website, for example, that Gail Dines reports that's called Use My Daughter. You can read, Janessa likes sex and her daddy money, so they both win when he gets strangers to fuck his daughter for cash. Another theme is the one of women who look like children, and that is teen, which is again a winner in all rankings, research rankings. And a lot of the time, pornographers are, and so one of the things is that supposedly the women are adults, and they are just made to look like children. But as Heather Bronsky-Levens puts it, there is no way for a man who consumes pornography of teen to look at girls on the beach and not see that those bodies are the same. And in fact, pornographers are making fun of us, and that's something they love. Some of the sites are called Barely Legal, or I Am 18. And they know that this distinction that is made between child and woman and girl and woman is so minimal, because it's in 24 hours, the damage that is done to you will not change. Then we have the racism. In the racism, we have the neutral terms that just refer to the nationality. So Japanese is a big win in 2019. We also have Korean, Indian. Another interesting feature is that the men love to consume the women who are who they see around them. So in France, top will be French. In Germany, will be German. So there seems to be that interest like that. Sometimes you have overtly racist terms. One of them is a pejorative term. So one popular category in France is beurette, which is a pejorative term for Arab women. You also have ebony. You also have one that I really like. I found jilbab, which is a contraction of jilbab, which is this sort of long veiling garment, and boobs. So again, this kind of destroys the myth that veiling could prevent the sexualization of women. And then another feature is the one of migration status. You have websites like Exploited African Immigrant. Then you have other texts that I would like to read with you, other descriptions. So one of them is, Arab refugee betrays the principle of their people by filming dirty porn. Another is, 5 niggers picked up an Arab refugee on the street and fucked her in the middle of the crowd. And a final one is, Arab refugee looking for a job sucks dicks to eat. You also have another one, but that needs maybe more anecdotal, but every single woman is represented in pornography, every single situation. And you even have disability. You can find videos of women with prosthetic legs that they then insert into their vaginas. Talking of penetration, we can classify the acts. So there are so many penetrations, they needed to have different words for them. We have the DP, the double penetration, where a woman is penetrated both in her anus and vagina at the same time. We have DAP, double anal penetration, so 2 penises in the anus. DPP, double pussy penetration. And then when she is penetrated in her mouth, in her anus, and her vagina, it's called eartight or topper whore. And sometimes with her 2 free hands, she will have to masturbate 2 other penises. Then we have, in terms of acts, we have the use of the sperm. A lot of the time, the camera will film it on the woman, and that is very important. I'll come back onto that. So if it's on the body, if the man ejaculates on the woman's body, it's called the cum shot. If it's on her face, it's the money shot. When it's multiple men coming on a woman, it's a bukkake. Sometimes they will use that sperm, the woman, and they will get it from one's mouth to another's mouth, and that's called cum swapping or snowballing. And here we see a feature of pornography. It's that it will exploit every single theme till exhaustion. We have urine, so men urinate on women. We have anal penetrations. I won't come much into that because we've had a wonderful webinar last week with Maria Joao, but one of the popular categories is ATM, which is ass to mouth, where after an anal penetration, a man puts his penis into the woman's mouth immediately after. But again, you have the variations on that. So you have ATP, ass to pussy. ATOGP, ass to other girls' pussy. So anal penetration on one woman, vaginal penetration on another woman, and then you have the same thing with the mouth, ATOGM, ass to other girls' mouth. Now, those acts are some of the ones that are watched the most. So there was this study conducted on 55 videos, that top-selling 55 videos over a month, by a group of researchers, and they found that close to 90% of the videos featured acts of violence, whether it was physical, whether it was verbal. So a lot of the time it was hitting the woman, those penetrations we've been talking about, those ATMs, etc. So this is not a niche element of pornography. Now, to understand why this constitutes dehumanization, which might be difficult sometimes because we're also embedded in pornography, I have used a lot of research on dehumanization that was done by academics that have worked a lot on the Holocaust. And one of them explains that the process of dehumanization can be understood as one where human beings are excluded from the community of humans and they lose their identity. And that happens in pornography. So the first way this happens is by the loss of the personal name. Women don't have names in pornography. They are sluts. They are whores. And that would make sense, because if pornography is the graphic depiction of vile whores, and if all we see is women, then the women are porn name. And that is made clear by, again, so those sluts, those insults thrown at them, and the only other time, so either the names are very parodic, they sound like the name of a Barbie doll, or they will be used attributes, so they will be called blonde or nympho. So again, what is essential in this is that their interchangeable character is put forward, because a personal name gives you a unique sense of self, whereas here, you're a whore just like the other one there. It makes no difference if it's you or her. Another way, and then something that is very important, and that's what Susan Griffin notes in her book, Pornography and Silence, is that the quest for mother, researching the term mother in pornography is because of the message that pornographers send. They say that the myth of the mother and the virgin, the mother and the whore is false. They say the mother is the whore too. She too can be fucked. This is why she appears in pornography. And this is a recurrent motif of pornography, where there are also those websites where there is this loss of virginity of pornography. So the women are turned into porne in front of the screen. And the message is, look, she looks innocent, but now I will show you, the viewer, and her, that really she is a slut, just like all women. The other way this dehumanization is enacted is from the exclusion from the human community by joining the one of animals. And because in our culture, men, and I insist on men, have distinguished themselves from animals and have placed themselves on top and animals on the bottom, being assimilated to an animal is being degraded. It's losing a rank. But notice that the degradation is not done by just being an animal. It's done by being the female of the animal. The women are not called pigs. And even pig as an insult is not because of the animal per se, but because of characteristics that we associate with this animal. They are the bitch. They are the female member of the species. And it's the same in French, for example, where we have only the female of the pig that becomes an insult. Another very important way in which women are excluded from the community of humans is by the loss of language. What recurs in Robert Jensen's book is that the woman in pornography squeaks. Like there are some elements where those lines from pornographers that say she squeaks like a pig. She doesn't sound human anymore. She just makes difficult sounds from the pain. Because she's in pain, she cannot talk. And the only time she talks, she confirms what the man is saying. So she will say, in pornography, she will say that she wants it more, that she has to give it to her. That's all she ever wanted. And this is where we have pornography is a perfect way to understand how misogyny at larger works in our society, because this is an operation of synesthesia. And so this is the operation where two senses are put together. So usually it's a figure of speech and it's used in poetry. So for example, if I say, I smell red strawberries, I associate the red of the sight to the smell. So two senses collide. And we have the same thing in pornography. We see the woman, but we hear the man. We see her, but she is saying exactly what he is saying. He is saying she is a slut, and in pornography she says, I am a slut. This is why the message is so important in Gonzo. You know, I have quoted those lines about Arab refugees, and we are in the sense of Gonzo. They could have just contented themselves with showing the acts, but no, it has to have a meaning. This is why men who consume pornography will try to find pornography in their own language, or they will look for in French or etc. And it's important to hear pornography. And this is what happens in our society as well. We see women in magazines, in adverts, etc., but we only hear men when we open the news, when we read, we hear their message. What happens also in pornography is also highlighted at large by the fact that pornography removes from us the power to name. The acts have names that do not allow us to call them for what they are as acts of violence. So urinating on a woman becomes a golden shower. Throwing sperm on her chest becomes a pearl necklace. That's an expression that's called when the sperm apparently looks like a necklace. Instruments of torture, or imprisonment, such as cuffs, handcuffs, or whips, become sex toys. Humiliations, acts of humiliations becomes ass to mouth. And I would like you to think about what an ATM is. It's where you put your card and get your money back. Choking becomes breastplay. Anal prolapses become rosebuds. When the sperm is inside the woman's vagina, which is a potentially dangerous practice because of the diseases and the risk of pregnancy, it becomes a cream pie. And worst of all, when we see gags on women's mouths, when they cannot speak, in English there's this expression, gagging orders, when you're not allowed to speak, the pornographer tells us he is defending freedom of speech. Now, what I have said so far about dehumanization cannot account for the presence of the camera. I used to think that pornography was just a more violent form of prostitution and a filmed version of it, but that's not entirely true because the camera plays an essential part in the process of dehumanization. Just like prostitution would not happen were it not for the money, pornography would not happen were it not for the camera. And whoever tells you that pornography is a voyeuristic experience is wrong. Pornography is exhibitionistic. It aims to show, it puts on display. In fact, it is entirely staged. Now, in the acts that I have mentioned, if the sole purpose of pornographers was to harm women, they could have picked any other form of violence. They could have just thrown wax on our genital parts. They could have just simply hit us, flogged us, whipped us, etc. But no. The most popular acts are deeply symbolic, and their harm is constituted by their symbolic nature, by their meaning. And this is why they also have to be seen. The first of all is the use of throwing sperm at the woman, or spitting on her, or urinating on her. It's throwing your secretions on her. And the word secretion comes from separation. And this is a further way that the women are excluded from the community of cleanliness. Men-woman separation, human in human. He puts his secretions on her. And when those secretions are feces, the symbolism is at its peak. Because the feces are what we eat, are the result of what we eat, and we could not assimilate, and that we have to evacuate to stay healthy. In fact, the word feces originally comes from the part in wine that could not be that was not assimilated to it. So it's that bottom part that sticks in it. And in Italian, it's interesting, there's this expression called drinking till the feces. So it's enduring something very painful. So the feces is something that has to be evacuated. It's something that has to be dejected. It's a dejection. You remove the feces through a movement of dejection. And dejection means to throw from the top to the bottom. But in pornography, her bottom is her top. The feces ends up in her mouth. And again, the mouth is a symbolic place because it's a place of social and biological life. You eat through your mouth, you speak through your mouth. But now that mouth is a receptacle of feces. And this is very symbolic again because I thought about, when doing this, about this Turkish insult, which is made to shit in someone's mouth. So even uttering this reality is enough to insult someone. And through this dejection, so sometimes the women themselves are feces. And that is made clear by this website that Robert Jensen reports that's called Swirly. And it's titled, Fuck 'em, then Flush 'em. So the women are penetrated in all possible ways, and then their head is put inside the toilet and it's flushed. This is how women are turned into abject. So the abject is something that is thrown away from you. And abject also means vile. This is why it's the depiction, pornography is the depiction of vile whores. If we think that pornography is a voyeuristic experience, so something that we fall into and that we're not supposed to see, we cannot explain why a lot of the acts, again, are deeply symbolic and have to be seen by others to make sense, to constitute the humiliation. One of those is the site facial abuse, where women are subjected to such a strong oral penetration that they vomit, and then they slurp that vomit, and then they throw it in a bucket. Why does she have to throw it in a bucket? Because it's his trophy. This is purely symbolic. And this is what humiliation is about. Humiliation is not the same as shame. You can humiliate someone and you're humiliated by someone. It's not something that comes from you, and it has to be seen. As Susan Griffin explains so well, humiliation is the death of an image. Humiliation is to make someone appear as despicable. It's to put them to the ground, but it has to be shown to others. And it's the end of this self-image and this public image, because the pornographer uses image, so he will destroy the image. And this is why pornography mortifies. And in mortifies, there is death. And this is the meaning that we can see in this video reported by Gail, where a woman is kneeling inside a coffin while she's being penetrated. Fuck him to death. This is the message of pornographers. And this is also perhaps the paradox of dehumanization, that you have to go through all that process. It's not fun if you're already considered human. You have to be human and then explain why you're not. And why is it important to dehumanize women in prostitution? Primo Levi, survivor of Nazi death camps, explains that dehumanization is the process by which human beings are rendered so radically other that it becomes possible for their persecutors to commit murder on a mass scale and for bystanders to stand by without objection or remorse. That is exactly what is happening with pornography. This is why pornography is a spectacle of power. The humiliation has to be seen by everyone to make sense. And this is why we can, if we want to gain back our power to name, we should call a lot of the acts that are happening in pornography right now torture. And to distinguish, to understand torture from mere violence, there are two important aspects. One of them is context. The victim has needs already to be in a position of powerlessness. Whereas in violence, the violence after the violence, the result is the powerlessness of the victim. The victim is already at the mercy of her perpetrator with torture. And the second aspect that is important is the attitude. The torturer actively aims to hurt. Now, it will be told that it's to get a confession, etc., but that's not entirely true. That's the second stage. The first stage of torture, and torture comes from twist. It's to twist till you break the will of the person. And I think this is exactly what is happening in pornography, especially if we look at the man who is deemed to be the godfather of Gonzo. That is Max Hardcore. He has introduced a lot of the acts that are now common in pornography. So he's one of the first to have introduced the idea of filming a woman's anus or vagina really up close, and now it's commonplace. He came up with this trick. He likes to confuse his victims, and he loves to pretend that they're 12 or 13 years old. He will even, well, anyway. One of those things is, for example, to ejaculate in a woman's anus and then force that woman to remove that sperm, put it on a glass, and then drink it. And in another one, he puts, one of his favorite tricks is to put a speculum in a woman's anus, gape it open, urinate in it, get a hose inside, and then put that hose into that woman's mouth so she can drink it. Now that is torture. And the acts that I've described so far have already been tried. In other contexts, they have been considered torture, and people have been convicted for torture for the acts that I'm describing of what is happening in pornography. And just like when you, in the studies of Nazi death camps on which I have worked a lot, the perpetrators did not see the people killed, but corpses produced. We have the same thing in pornography. It's not women that are hurt, but they're pussies that are destroyed. So it's on an industrial scale here too. But the part that is where the graphic part, again, makes more sense, where the fiction comes into place, is that she wants it. So what is so important about the study that I have cited about the most watched contents in pornography is that for the first time in academia, the acts that were reported as violent were reported independently of the reaction of the woman. Because before that, if the woman smiled or she didn't react, it wasn't considered a violence. It was not the perpetrator that was judged, it was the victim. Here again, we have a logic of strong misogynistic logic. And so what happened in those acts of violence is that a lot of the time, most of the time, the women either do not react or they smile. And that is the fictive part of pornography. And this is how we see this whole dehumanization come into place. I hope it still works. Some things have changed. Because the women are turned into other, so it's possible to hurt them. For the man without feeling guilt or remorse, or for the pornographer viewer not to see what is actually going on. And for us, as bystanders, not to react or remorse because we don't see the harm done on a woman. And what is special about pornography is that pornography is very aware of itself, and it's the snake, it is eating its own tail. So it creates this fictive world where it says, women are not human, that's fine, go for it. And then it says, well, look, they're not reacting, that's the proof that they're not human. Any person would react in front of such violence, right? Any person would say to stop if there was such pain instead of saying keep going. So it confirms its own lie, and it ends up believing in its own lie. And this is where we see how pornography, so one advantage of pornography is that it's very honest about what it's doing. And I began by saying that pornography is a treatise on prostitution. So what does it tell us about prostitution? What does that all say? Well, as a spectacle of power, it's also a theatralization of prostitution. It tells us exactly what happens. It tells us the story. So for a start, the women lose their name. I have yet to find an account of a woman in prostitution or who has survived it that did not change her name when she entered prostitution. This is the first loss of identity that happens. And what's really interesting is that some of them I don't want to say top, but most famous women in pornography have nicknames that copy the ones of famous actresses. So for example, Angelina Jolie or Nikita Bellucci. Because this is where the acting comes into place, because prostitution is an acting. And we see it in the testimonies of men who abuse women in prostitution, whether in forums or in interviews. They complain when the women in prostitution do not show that they want it. And yet they know that the women do not want it because they have paid for them. That's the proof that the women do not want to engage in sex with them. And they complain because they don't fake it, in a way. And that makes sense if you think of it. Nobody wants to watch a film where we know it's a film. We want to have the closest illusion to reality. And this is how we can make sense of the popularity of the category amateur in pornography, because we don't want it to be in a studio. We want it to forget that it's all staged for the viewer, that it's all artificial. They want it to be as close as possible to reality, while they know it's fake. And it's this, by the same way, we can explain why the so-called girlfriend experience in prostitution is one of the most expensive ones, because we forget that it's prostitution. But at the same time, so there's this looking for fiction, but at the same time, I say that pornography is very honest because it tells you exactly how prostitution comes into place. This is why vulnerability is so interesting. This is why they have to be, with an illegal migrant status, they have to look like children. They have to be naked. We forget it, but nakedness is a form of vulnerability to spoliation. It's the removal of the clothes, of the shields, of everything that, the armor, sorry, everything that protects you. So they're vulnerable, they're hairless as well. That's a further vulnerability. And this is why pornographers are making fun of the people who distinguish between girls in prostitution and women in prostitution without knowing that the women in prostitution are just girls that have survived, as McKinnon puts it. And they say barely legal. They're making fun of us because they tell us what the men who prostitute women are looking for. They're looking for that vulnerability. And a lot of it, and also in pornography, there's a lot of reference to money. She needs the money. They are telling us something about prostitution. They are making it clear. Now at this point, if there were still any doubts about, so even after unveiling the logic of pornography, you still wonder if it's possible to make it better, I have not done a good job of it. So I will explain why it's impossible to change the reality of pornography and what it means and what it does to women. So one of the claims behind the idea that pornography could be made better is the one of sexual liberation. But because pornography would allow us to explore sexuality, etc., but pornography is deprived of any imagination. Pornography cannot offer anything that is not already here. It cannot go beyond the violence that exists. It cannot envision a world where violence doesn't exist. It just takes the existing violence into its extreme. It mimics, for example, during this pandemic, there was a surge in pornography, of coronavirus pornography. It cannot go away from where it is. The other thing is that this idea that pornography would help us into this path into sexual liberation comes from the idea that if we have more acts sexual acts, we would change things, when really what we need, as Sheila Jeffries puts it in Anticlimax, is to rethink the roles and the power structures. That would be really liberating. And then again, still Jeffries explains that equating sexual liberation with women's liberation, it's already reducing our existence to sexuality. It's not because we can have sex that we're free. There are also economic reasons why pornography cannot be improved. So first of all, this idea of selling pornography to women, it's part of this marketing trick. The market is saturated. And just like in the past, tobacco industries had to start selling to women, and in fact it was Edward Bernays that wrote Propaganda that sold cigarettes as empowering and liberating to women. We have the same trick today, but that's why, because they have sold it to every man possible, and now they need to make more money. Money, I've already said it, it's all about making money. It's not about liberating, etc. We should be actually quite outraged that big corporations are stealing our sexuality away from us. They are telling us what to do. There is this line from a pornography website that says, "We, at Pure Filth, know exactly what you want." So they decide what we want. And then another thing, why any supposedly non-violent pornography is bound to fail, it's because pornography has to escalate to keep its viewers. This is, in fact, what we have described today has started in 1953 with Playboy. So it was simply naked women. And now we're here because you need more. You need to keep going. And then finally, a reason why pornography cannot be improved is that pornography is still at its heart a form of prostitution. It's still women that are paid to engage in sexual acts they do not want to. And that can never be good for women. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yağmur. I'm going to open now the part for the Q&A, if I find it. If anybody has a question, please write it on the chat. I've been putting together some questions already. There's this question that okay, so it said, working with women who were as children conditioned to act as an animal, to normalize bestiality, and to have pornography used as a tool, they grow up to believe such behavior is relational. Forced to eat feces becomes normal, their non-state torture is sexualized, so all they say conditions them to be vulnerable adult women used in pornographic violence. And then the question is there research that identifies a percentage of women that were so pornographically tortured that they were conditioned as small children? Do you know if you know of any?
No, I think no, I don't know of that any research of the kind. The only thing I can refer to is this pornography documentary that we shared about Andrea Dworkin on our Facebook page, where she holds those talk groups, and a lot of the women in there talk about being abused in pornography at a very young age, and that might be of interest. It's old, it's from the 90s, if I'm not wrong. Before.
I think it's from 91.
Yeah, or something like that. So, but I don't have any research on that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Also, there's another question: is do you have any cases to reference cases convicted of torture in pornography? Are there any cases that were men convicted of torture in their pornographic exploitation?
I haven't come across any. Max Hardcore has been convicted, but not of torture, and it was still a very short time. But I have not come across on that. No, sorry.
Okay. Another question related to non-state torture is if you have a list of countries of law that covers non-state torture in pornography.
No.
Okay. There's also no worries. There's also a question, or more of a comment, so that you can share your references for the dehumanization that you took as the example of the Holocaust. So I'm thinking that we will make an email to all the participants with the resources and the things that you cited today. Okay. Then there was a comment about torture being sexualized. That all the women that this organization has worked with were told that they weren't it. They were not even a person. And some of them did not even know or seem to realize that they have a physical body or even skin. So it's really a comment that goes in agreement to everything you just said. Yep. There is another question saying, how do we engage young women, young men or boys in schools regarding the issue of pornography?
In terms of engaging them on an educational level, I don't want to come up with just random solutions right now. What I can say about young men, what I have encountered at the moment with young men watching pornography, and what gives me hope is that pornography has gone so far that it's becoming unwatchable, even to men. And this is the first time I heard that. It's from a friend from Radical Girl, who told me that she was in this university and she was in this room where all men were saying, we cannot watch it anymore because it disgusts us so much. I have encountered men that I thought were alpha male that say that they cannot watch it anymore. I have recently gone into this forum on video games, which is all men usually, and I keep seeing threads about the fact that men cannot watch it anymore, and how it has become some sort of addiction, and how they don't know how to stop it and they hate it. And what I want, sorry, I was distracted by this comment of alpha male. I'm not sure what's not clear about. But what I want to say is that, so I said they cannot watch it. I've forgotten the rest of it. So they cannot watch it because it's gone too far. So this is where I see hope. And in terms of engagement, oh yeah, I think the difference in apprehending the issue of prostitution, that is, I mean, prostitution, I mean, of course, pornography is a form of prostitution. Maybe I can use Megan Tyler's distinction with traditional prostitution and pornography. Well, we do have this demand approach, right, in prostitution, that if there is no demand, this wouldn't happen. That holds true for pornography. But I think that a nuance must be added, because in the same way that we do not hold smokers accountable for smoking, because we realize that there are corporations that have a vested interest in maintaining this going, and they create addictive behavior, but that's even on Coca-Cola, that's in lots of daily products. I think that there is an element, there's a certain difficulty, but then again, this is anecdotal evidence. It has to be more systematized in research. I think that there's more difficulty in stopping pornography, and that this is why I agree with Catherine McKinnon that says that pornography is a matter of offer, whereas prostitution is of demand. We need to hold the corporations accountable and go for them. It doesn't entirely engage the topic, because I don't know how you can do that in a school context. You know, it's not just like, hey boys, like don't watch ATM. I mean, that's not, but it's about how do we make sure we hold those accountable. The person has more questions or not.
There is a question about what do you mean by alpha male? Not directly related, but
alpha male, I think it's what the stereotypical masculine traits that are in a person. So you would expect them, you know, this sort of, I don't know why, is it clear? What we would assume are male stereotypes. This sort of confidence, smelling, boasting, everything is owned to me sort of attitude.
I think that answers the question, but if not, don't hesitate to write it. Yeah, there's a specification saying alpha males don't exist in reality, even in the animal kingdom, alpha males don't exist.
Okay, I'm sorry, then it was the wrong expression. What men I would have never thought would be against. I can be more precise. Men that are not necessarily pro-feminist or have this approach that still cannot consume it anymore. That is more precise. I'm sorry.
Okay. Also, will we be able to share this presentation later?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Susanna. I don't know if any other women has any question. Please don't hesitate to write it in the chat, and we will be happy to help you. Maybe I have a question. I was wondering because usually when we talk about pornography, it's we do it already in the feminist movement. You know what I mean? It's for women who maybe already have an analysis or some kind of reflection. Maybe it seems obvious as a question, but why do you choose specifically to target women or people in general that are not very in touch with the pornographic industry? And do you think it's easier to talk to this public in a way, or do you see any difference?
Okay, so why I have made this a beginner's level, like introduction to pornography, you mean, instead of talking to a feminist circle? Well, I think it makes it more interesting because I think that the key, and this is the message I get from Andrea Dworkin's book. It's a very difficult book because of the content and of the language, but I strongly recommend everyone to read it. But I'm sure most have. But this is the meaning of, she always tried to make pornography real to the audience, and I think this is what we have to do. We have to make sure every single woman knows what is happening in pornography. I think this is the only way we will get forward with this. So I think in that sense it's more interesting to talk to women who do not know yet. Perfect. Answer?
There is a question asking if we could have a kind of publication, more or less a 2-page publication, focusing specifically on linguistic and symbolic analysis, the beginning of your webinar.
Oh yes, it will be published. It's in fact part of my research that hopefully I will finish writing and then publish. So yes, I will update you with it as well.
Perfect. I feel like this is something that is really lacking in today's analysis, is to go back to the roots, no? To the radicality of of the whole question.
Yeah, in fact, it's much longer, but some of the things I've discovered are very interesting. So, for example, I will add it now. But dejection, the first time it's recorded in French language, so you look back at the history and you go as far as it can go. One of the meaning of dejection is also deprivation. And deprivation is one of the meanings of it. It's let me be exact here. So first, one of the physiological meanings, it's the grave alteration of an organ or of a physical organ that loses its original form. And then in the social meaning, it's lack of moral, especially in the field of sexuality. So the lack of a sense of right or wrong, which is exactly what is happening in pornography. There is no one that says, no, this is wrong. Not because of societal values or anything, because it hurts. And I think that we need to come back to this, and I'm convinced that as in the inescapable morality of sentient beings, because if we feel we want to avoid suffering and we have a sense of right or wrong, I don't think we can escape that. And I'm against this whole contemporary thing of, everything is relative, etc. No.
Okay. Wait. Yeah. There is a question that I find very, very interesting, is how can we as women prevent this violence to get inside our own sexual life?
It's already in there. I mean, let's not lie to ourselves. Pornography, it has, we can think of this as a trickle-down effect, because what was, or an outlet, maybe that's easier, what was in pornography 30 years ago is now on our TV. So Game of Thrones, Playboy did not even feature the naked woman on its cover. And now they constitute ads that are on the back of buses, etc. So pornography has invaded our lives, and this is what Gail Dines shows very well in her book, that was carefully crafted. So I think it's already in our lives. What we can do about it is talk about it and learn about it and try to identify it. And by fighting it, I think by holding those corporations accountable, because I don't think I'm the only one that feels that has had her sexuality stolen. Those pornographers have invaded our fantasies. But I don't think we can just impede it by ourselves, just not look at it. It's already there.
Mm-hmm. I would add, in a way, because, I mean, maybe this is a bit personal for a webinar, but I do think that us women, young or older women, we are all affected by this, I mean, the heterosexual ones at least. I myself, in the way that I have found in my encounters with men, let's say, it's really speak up, because I think there's always that little voice in your head that recognizes a kind of an act or a demand that is quickly derived from porn. And this is when I say, no, I have no shame in stopping whatever is happening and saying, no, this is not okay for me, I don't feel comfortable. That totally goes away the pornographic logic, which is, I am here, I am not even a woman, I'm just a hole for you, and I have no say in this except give it to me, or yes, something like that. So I really think speaking up, but also there's a fine line if you're not really kind of connected to the feminist critique of pornography, is that you don't even recognize yourself that there is something wrong. So I think the question goes mainly from there, but this is the tactic that I have adopted, is speaking up. There's already like a wall between you and me saying this is not okay, this is infringing on my consent and on my well-being. Like sex and sexual liberty is about your own well-being, I think, in a way. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my personal tactic, at least. Like, I will not accept anything that I can really, that hurts my body, hurts my soul and my mind, and it's not going to happen with me.
Yeah, and I think, to add on that, I don't think I am the only one when I say that it's very easy to, when you are having sex with a man, to know if he watches, to distinguish the one that watches a lot of pornography from the one that doesn't. I think it becomes very clear during the sexual act, at least, again, talking personally. And I think there is more difficulty. This is why we need to work together, because I'm very worried about this thing that you're talking about, the saying no. I think that the saying no is very looked down upon, and I am considered the worst, the prude, if I may, person, because I am against pornography, but because, of course, pornography and sex have been equated so much. And this is why I'm also worried about this discourse on consent, because it's not enough to agree as if it's in a contract. If you don't want it, you don't want it. You don't have to justify or anyway, you just don't. And if he keeps going, there's a problem.
Natasha is asking if you could do a quick comment about feminist pornography.
Oh yeah, a comment on it. So again, so if you want some interesting facts, I won't make publicity for her, but one of the leading names in feminist pornography, you know, we might call like humanist Holocaust or philanthropic slavery as well, has actually half of her viewers are men. So I had another part in this, but I had to remove it because I thought I wouldn't have time. But pornography didn't appear in a day, so it's embedded. So this is why I also referred to the Holocaust, because I think that in the Western world, in Europe and US specifically, it's considered one of the worst, you know, we don't have the same not attachment is the wrong word, but we don't have the same sense of, you know, graveness maybe from slavery, maybe especially in Europe, maybe because we always think it's the other or everything, but there's, I think, in the collective imaginary, it's still like the worst possible. And this is why pornography appeared in the West, right? So, sorry, I'm talking about this. This is not unrelated because I'm talking about something Western. And why pornography appeared in the West, why at this period of the time. There is a culture of looking at women. And I wanted to talk about John Berger, where he explained, or Berger, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, in ways of seeing. And he looks at traditional European oil painting. And you see some of the motives that are recurring in the objectification of women. Because you have the nude, and the nude is to be put on display to be looked at by other men. So you need this before. You need a culture of sexual violence. You need industrialization. This is why it's not possible for women from one day to the next to start looking at men, because we have never looked at men. We've never had traditional oil painting. We've never had this imagery. We've never wanted to violate men. We don't see them as objects. So, and also it makes no sense. Why do we keep on copying what men do? What is this thing that would make it, that is sexist per se? Why do we need pornography? I think that is the question. That's the question Max Waltman asks. Like, we need evidence of the need of that. So it's bound to fail because, as I said, we don't recognize violence. That's a problem. And even so, it will have to escalate if it doesn't want to disappear. And they work together. So you will see what is considered so-called feminist and so, alternative and small market, homegrown pornography, whatever, is actually working really close with the big names in the trade. And there's only a few of them because this is just like a monopoly game.
Thank you. There's this question from Beck saying that she has some colleagues in the arts who are against the criticism of pornography because they are supporters of lesbian erotica. Mm-hmm. Do you see a difference between pornography and so-called erotica, or do you view them as the same thing?
No, I think I'm team Dworkin. And Dworkin, in the opening of her book, says that erotica thing is nonsense. Because, again, there are... it can be explained from economic terms. So, sorry, I will have to. So I will focus on the lesbian and the erotica separately. So the erotica, it can be explained on economic terms in the sense that, in the same way, for example, hentai. Hentai is this form of manga that is extremely sexualized, and it would supposedly not be harmful because not real women are involved, etc. But that's not understanding that hentai is only possible when there is already that form for pornography per se. So those are just markets that you open. You open new segments in a market. You sell the products. You brand the products differently for a different audience. In that sense, I believe that this distinction between erotica and pornography, it's a distinction of class. Again, I think that in the same way that the man who distinguishes between the street prostitutes, in this case I will use that in the male terms, from the so-called escort girl, when he doesn't notice that it's the same woman. In fact, when you look at accounts from survivors, they will say that they have been everywhere, from the brothel to the street to the supposedly high end to the low end. And this is a form of price discrimination. You have the same product, but you sell it at different prices according to the demand and your customers. Then against erotica and this distinction, I will take the example of Pasolini, which is the example that Susan Kappeler, she has this fantastic book called The Representation of Pornography, and she says that the distinction between what makes it pornography and what makes it art is the fame of the man who makes it. And just because Pasolini is famous, his 120 Days of Sodoma are considered art and not pornography, and he's considered as an intellectual who has spoken strongly against oppression when he himself has abused boys. And you can see that, and he's making a film where he's supposedly criticizing violence when he is using real women who are in real positions of subordination in that film. I mean, watch the trailer, it's unbearable. So in that sense, to me, it's not interesting. On the lesbian part, again, the lesbian is not really lesbian, and then Dworkin again makes it really clear that the aim of lesbian, which is one of the categories that is looked the most as well, is the idea for men to see the real nature of women. So how, just like in a zoo, this Kappeler, something that adds Kappeler, right? Just like in a zoo, you would like to pretend that the animals, you see them in a real habitat. Well, the woman in the so-called lesbian pornography, the male user of pornography, kids himself into believing that this is how women act when no man is in the room, just like the others.
What is the name of the book, sorry, Yağmur?
The Representation of Pornography by Susan Kappeler.
Okay. The next question is that some pro-pornography and prostitution advocates would argue with ethical pornography. How do you consider that you would answer this position? Well,
I would answer it by saying that, as I said, pornography, you are using real women. And even if, you know, no man is slapping them, no man is hurting them, etc., they are still engaging in acts they don't want to engage in. And how do I know that they don't want to engage in? They have to be paid to do them. That's the constraint. It's the financial constraint that makes it real.
Okay. I'm waiting for some last questions. If not, is the book that you're talking about called Representing Pornography, Feminism, Criticism, and Depictions of Female Violation?
Oh, yeah. I don't know the subtitles. I will write it down. I will add it in the email. Don't worry.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think we are done. I'm just waiting to see if
I will have a look as well.
If a question, did you want me to show any picture that you sent to me beforehand?
Maybe we can show the hustler to make sense of it all.
Okay.
Just to maybe, because I said that pornographers, I think this is why Susan Griffin's book is so important, Pornography and Silence, because she keeps explaining how pornography is very aware of itself, and it's always, you know, there is this scene in Max Hardcore where he abuses this woman who pretends to be a child, and he does what convicted pedophiles have done. So he will shout on her, he will confuse her, he will call her honey, and the next minute he will slap her. At some point he puts her on the sink, he shaves her pubis, and then penetrations, etc., and then he ejaculates on her, and he takes a photo of it. So this is, you know, pornography inside pornography. This is why pornography is honest, and it's telling exactly what it does. It doesn't lie about itself. And in this picture, Larry
Can you see?
Yeah, thank you. The owner and creator, the owner of Hustler, says, "We will no longer hand women like pieces of meat." He is standing by his words. He is making fun of anti-pornography activists. Well, instead of hanging them up like meat, he is mincing women. And this is where we see the process of dehumanization at work, because first she has to be the woman, the human, and then through the pornography machine she becomes the minced meat.
Okay. I'll take it away. It's blocking everything. Yes, just to answer your question, yes, the webinar is being recorded. We will end it now, seeing as there are no other questions, and we will send you the link to this recording. I don't know if you have any last words, Yağmur, for our viewers, if you wish to say anything else.
I think, and I'm calling out to all the lawyers here. Thank you. There is something that pornographers are really scared of, and that's the law. When you look at their trade magazines, because that's what they are, their business plans are out, they're all open, and they have this whole army of lawyers. They are extremely scared of the law, and they follow it. But they just have to put the name pornography on it for it not to be considered legal, when really, as I said, it's torture. And so they are trying to move within the limits of what is allowed inside pornography. So we need to use the law. That's something that they're really scared of. And when I said that they put the name pornography to make it look fine, I think we have the same thing with sex. So in the so-called, in those sadistic practices, there's this really good argument. So this is an argument from Muriel Fabre-Magnan that has worked a lot on consent, and she destroys consent as a concept. And she explains that there's this case of so-called sadomasochism, famous Belgian case where the man escaped conviction only because of the consent of the woman. So it was fine. So they did some of the things I told. So they put wax on her genitals, they put needles on her breasts, they hung her, and they were only judged because it was consent, because she did not consent. And what it says is that in this case, any person that does those acts can put the name sex on top of it, and that will make it fine. This is exactly what we're having with pornography. What Max Hardcore does is tame compared to what happened in Abu Ghraib with the American soldiers and the Iraqi prisoners. It's a joke, honestly. It's far worse. All of this that I've said, forced eating of feces, shaving, urinating, putting forced nudity itself is enough to constitute a case of torture. But by putting the tag pornography, it goes away. So how do we hold those accountable through law?
Mm-hmm. In the case of Dworkin and McKinnon, that they had these civil rights hearings, proceedings, but I don't think that in most of the countries where we live, we have such a mechanism in place to hold them accountable.
This is what we need to think of. Also, we need to think of which law of which country, because the domineering obviously the big bosses are in the U.S., but then you also have the Netherlands, obviously, Germany, and then you have their legal how do you call it? Their legal holding can be in Switzerland or Luxembourg. It's all this very evasive sort of gray zones of law. So that would also involve, where do we hold them accountable? Where the act happened, where the mother, I don't know. This is why I'm calling out to the lawyers. But we have to do this again, because they are terrified of that. And they are very scared of anti-pornography activists, and they are convinced that there is a new wave of anti-pornography activism. Okay. And then I say that relying on the latest issues of, the big trade men.
One of the viewers is saying that France has a law against torture, such as this one.
In fact, there's also, in the French law, if you film the act of torture, you receive a higher penalty. So it's understood by the law that the action of filming is a supplementary violation, and it also can be spread to be used against other women. And this is what you see in pornography and child abuse. You see that it's used by the perpetrators. They show the pornography before, like, this is what you're going to do, this is, so it's, the violation of one woman is used for the ones of others.
Is that through the abolitionist law, or that's got nothing to do?
That has nothing to do. That's the law on torture. In fact, my research started from the fact of asking, why does the abolitionist law not include pornography, the Nordic model? And I would refer, I think this is something else that it will send. It's Max Wortman. He's a Swedish researcher. Maybe we'll have a member, Megan from Talita, will talk about, Meg from Talita will talk about him. He has written this book called The Legal Challenges to Pornography, and he works on Sweden, US, etc. So that's something else to look at. There's already some legal material. And so how do we get together to get through with it?
Yeah, we have a comment here. The Spanish viewers saying that in Spain they want to do that. They're trying to get to that law. And Jean Farson is saying that they have been trying in non-state torture to name that non-state torture is a violation of human rights to get a global foot in society. I really hope this comes through, especially in the UN world.
It's a bit difficult.
And actually, there was a last question. How do you think we should talk to women in prostitution? Sorry, I missed the question. Oh, yeah. Who think they enjoy and who share the thought that this is a choice?
Well, I think we need to keep always men in the picture. So in prostitution, there's this idea that, again, this idea that some women choose it or women want it, when really any person, you know, when I see this, what happens in Max Hardcore, what is this? Some woman says it would harm me. Why would it not harm other women? And I think this is also a problem of multiculturalism that's seeping into our global thought. And this is a great argument against it that Safiya Bourjalat makes, that says, why is it that what is good for me is not good for you? So why is it that if it's good for me to go out from home without a veil, it's fine for you not to be able to go out of your house without being veiled? So this is the argument she makes. And it's the same with prostitution. Why is it that for me it's harmful, but for some reason for her it's not? So I think that comes from the idea of distinguishing between the prostitutes and the normal woman. And that's the language that the men who use women in prostitution use. They say, I do things with her that I wouldn't do with others. And I think this is also why we have this distinction with revenge pornography. Why? Because the women have not been paid. This is why we think it's a violation, because they have not been paid. But as long as they're paid, we call it pornography and we make it legal. And also we think that because they're not in pornography normally, they deserve more protection. Well, every woman deserves the same protection. Why do we understand that revenge pornography is harmful? Because your intimacy has been exposed. But when we reduce it to a matter of consent and when we reduce it to a matter of payment, we come up with those distinctions of laws, and we enshrine the abuses that as women we have. So instead of, you know, talking about the rights of prostitutes, you know, I'm using that in brackets, we need to talk about the rights of women, and one of those rights is not to be prostituted. And again, when we talk about choice, it's impossible to choose to prostitute yourself. It's impossible, because prostitution is a collective phenomenon. Just like teaching, the idea of teaching is not possible without a teacher and a person being taught. I could go out on the street right now, but I will not be prostituted if a man doesn't choose to prostitute me. So this is how I would talk about this. And yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. I am waiting for the last questions if you women have any. But in the meantime, I wanted to let you know that our next webinar will be on Friday, as I said before, with Megan Donovan. She is the founder and manager of Talita. It's a Swedish NGO that works with women that are in the sex industry, namely the pornographic industry as well. So she will share with us a study that was done in Sweden about the use of pornography in Sweden, which doesn't really change much from European country to another. And then on the 28th, we will have Dr. Gail Dines with us as well. So this is something that we haven't published on social media yet, because we're doing the last details, but we will be talking with Dr. Gail Dines on Tuesday 28th at 7 p.m. Brussels time as well. So we hope to see you all there on both dates. I'm thinking there's no other questions. I think women are tired.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bearing with me.
Thank you so much, and we will be sharing the resources with all of you very, very soon. Thank you all for attending. You're always a great audience. It's really awesome to have webinars with such an audience. I feel very privileged. So thank you so much, and have a great night. Bye-bye. Je vais attendre que... I'm waiting. Yeah.
Je regarde les commentaires, je suis curieuse.
Ah, yeah. You didn't read anything.
Non. Des trucs... aussi, ça m'intéressait l'histoire de la violence.